Welcome to the City of Bakersfield Planning Commission meeting. This television broadcast is made available through cooperation with the local cable companies, the County of Kern, and the City of Bakersfield. The Planning Commission meets on the first and third Thursdays of each month. You can watch the rebroadcast of this meeting Saturday at 7 p.m. and Sunday at 10 a.m. The planning meeting agenda is posted on the city's website at www.bakersfieldcity.us. Presiding over today's meeting, Chair Larry Coman.
Good evening. Welcome to the December 17th, 2020 Planning Commission meeting. We'll call that to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Coman.
Here.
Commissioner Rudnick.
Here.
Commissioner Bell.
Here.
Commissioner Bowers.
Here.
Commissioner Cater.
Here.
Commissioner Lomas.
Here.
Commissioner Wade.
Thank you. On March 4th, Governor Newsom declared a state of emergency in California due to the threat of COVID-19. The governor also passed several executive orders related to social distancing, shelter at home practices, and more. These orders also included the suspension of some components of the Brown Act related to public meetings like this one. As a result, commissioners have the option to attend remotely. In today's meeting, there are no remote commissioners, and you just heard the roll call. So, at this time, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Thank you for attending tonight's Planning Commission meeting. The Commission provides an opportunity for public participation in the development process throughout the City of Bakersfield. The Planning Commission considers a wide variety of projects, including subdivision maps, zone changes, general plan amendments, and more. When applications are received, the City Planning Division analyzes the request. Planning staff will present the facts about the project along with their recommendations to the Planning Commission, who will approve the item or make a recommendation as appropriate. Our goal is to carefully consider each project and make a decision that will balance individual rights with public welfare and the general well-being of the community. We will now receive public statements. This is reserved for anyone wishing to address the Commission on any matter not on the public hearing portion of the agenda. If you are here on items 5A through 5C, this is not the time to speak. Does anyone in the audience wish to address the Commission? If so, please come forward and state your name. Seeing none, we will now move on to the consent calendar non-public hearing items. These agenda items typically involve housekeeping or administrative matters that do not require a public hearing. Does any commissioner wish to remove a consent calendar non-public hearing item for separate consideration? Okay. In that case, may I have a motion to adopt staff's recommendation on the consent calendar non-public hearing items?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make the motion.
Commissioner Bowers? You have a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Rudnick. Thank you. We're doing the on-the-screen voting today. So
Can we do a roll call, Chair?
is you okay? All right. All right then. So we're gonna have a roll call vote, Madam Clerk?
Commissioner Coman.
Yes.
Commissioner Rudnick.
Yes.
Commissioner Bell.
Yes.
Commissioner Bowers.
Yes.
Commissioner Cater.
Yes.
Commissioner Lomas.
Yes.
All right. Do you need to like publish any results or anything? Okay. Okay. And everybody said yes? Okay. The next agenda section includes public hearing items that are considered routine or non-controversial. These items have been reviewed by staff and are conditioned in accordance with the requirements of the municipal code. The planning director will read the items on the consent calendar to ensure that the public has an understanding of the items to be considered. If you would like to speak on an item, please come forward after the items are read and ask that the item be removed for discussion. If the item is not removed by a member of the public or a commissioner, the commission will vote on all items in one motion without further comment. Director Johnson, would you like to read the items?
Yes, thank you, Chair Coleman. We have 3 items on the consent agenda tonight. The first item is a request to subdivide approximately 79 acres into 34 buildable parcels for future industrial development, 4 drill islands, and 1 sump lot that's generally located at the southeast corner of Hageman Road and Knutson Drive. Staff's recommendation for this is to approve with incorporation of the Public Works memo dated December 16th, 2020. Item 5B is zone change. It's Chick-fil-A requesting a change from PCD, Planned Commercial Development, to revised PCD to facilitate a change in use from retail to fast food restaurant. And this is located at 9030 Rosedale Highway. And item 5C is text amendments to the Bakersfield Municipal Code by adding chapter 17.73 to provide a procedure for reasonable accommodation in the city's land use and zoning regulations pursuant to State of California Department of Housing and Community Development guidelines and requirements and the Fair Housing Law. This completes staff's reading of the consent calendar agenda items.
Thank you, Director Johnson. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on a consent calendar public hearing item?
Chair Coleman,
Yes,
I think you have to open all consent calendar public hearing
I'm
items
sorry.
first.
At this time, I will open the consent calendar public hearing items. Thank you, Ms. King. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on a consent calendar public hearing item? Again, this is not the time to take testimony. Okay. Does any commissioner wish to remove a consent calendar public hearing item? Okay. All right. At this time, the public hearings on all of the consent calendar and public hearing items not removed are now closed. May I get a motion to adopt staff's recommendation on the consent calendar public hearing items?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make the motion to adopt staff recommendations.
Commissioner Bowers? You have a second, please?
I'll second.
Commissioner Rudnick. And Madam Clerk, I think the city attorney still wants a roll call vote?
Yes, please.
All right.
Commissioner Coleman,
Yes.
Commissioner Rudnick,
Yes.
Commissioner Bell,
Yes.
Commissioner Bowers,
Yes.
Commissioner Cater,
Yes.
Commissioner Lomas.
Yes.
Motion passes with Commissioner Wade absent.
Thank you. And that concludes all those items. I think we now move on to workshops. Item number 7. Director Johnson, do you have a presentation?
Yes, this will be a receive and file item. It's a workshop on the California Environmental Quality Act. It'll be presented by the Development Services Director, Christopher Boyle.
Thank you. Mr. Boyle, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Coleman. Commissioners, it's always a pleasure to come into Commission chambers. In support of this workshop tonight, I have some handouts that might help solidify our topic now and into the future. So I'd like to just provide those. And, you know, I appreciate that recommendation, Chair Coleman. It's I don't want to lose your attention span over the course of the workshop, and I have the unenviable task of talking about something that is a little bit heavy. That would be the California Environmental Quality Act. And that said, the purpose of my presentation is not to overwhelm you with knowledge, but to provide you with a strong and solid background on the California Environmental Quality Act, at least up to a dialogue with the mitigated negative declaration. And my intent would be to simplify the complex. So let's talk about the California Environmental Quality Act. A little bit of history. The act is a California statute passed in 1970 and signed into law by then Governor Ronald Reagan. It was enacted just after an overall national policy. A federal government passed National Environmental Policy Act, often called NEPA. And the simple purpose of CEQA is to institute a statewide policy of environmental protection. CEQA doesn't directly regulate land uses, but instead it requires state and local agencies, like the City of Bakersfield, to follow a protocol of analysis and public disclosure of environmental impacts of a proposed project. CEQA makes environmental protection a mandatory part of every California state and local public agency's decision-making process. So why is it important for a little workshop with the Planning Commission? Well, as your responsibilities expand with the dissolution of the BZA and with the general plan update on the horizon, I'd like to start at first base and talk about the fundamentals, exemptions, and negative declaration components, initial studies of CEQA. And then before we start seeing the environmental impact report with the general plan update, as well as we also have another environmental impact report being prepared at this point in juncture, we'll have a second follow-up workshop. And I promise I'll try to be as brief as possible. For the purpose of this presentation, brevity is the rule of the day. So all state and local agencies must give major consideration to environmental protection and regulating public and private activities. And as the statute states, should not approve projects for which there exist feasible and environmentally superior mitigation measures or alternatives. The key term there is, what is a project? And that's where CEQA analysis starts. It starts with the determination of whether there is a project. You have on your top sheet this CEQA process flow chart. It has been around since the cows came home, and it's about the best thing I could provide you as it relates to a streamlined, here's how things work. And I'll follow this table as I go through this workshop. First step on your workshop would be public agency determines whether this activity is a project. So what are projects? There's essentially three basic types of projects. A project means the whole of an action which has the potential for resulting in either a direct physical change in the environment or a reasonably foreseeable indirect physical change in the environment. And that is any of the following. The first list is an activity that's undertaken by a public agency. Some of those things come to you, whether that's a zoning ordinance amendment or a general plan amendment. Other things might be public works projects or grant activities and the like, where the project is deemed to satisfy those parameters. The first exemption, the first type of project would be an activity undertaken by a public agency. The second type would be an activity undertaken by a person which is supported in part by public dollars. So it can be when state dollars are involved, if it is a project, that's a project and it must undergo CEQA analysis. If federal dollars are involved, you must perform NEPA analysis, and when both of those dollars are involved, like many of the CARES Act types of things that we've seen in response to the pandemic, then both NEPA and CEQA documentation are required as a component of that. So When monies are attached to a particular project, that entitlement must go through CEQA analysis. The third activity involves the issuance of a permit, of a lease, a permit, license, certificate, or other entitlement, and you hear the term entitlement from your dais quite often, for use when it's issued by a public agency. So if there's a discretionary permit involved, then CEQA analysis must be completed. So whether that's a use permit or a zoning modification, if your discretion is required as part of that permit process, then CEQA analysis must also be done. So when it's done, when we determine that it's a project, then there's a step that we go through. The next step is the public agency determines if the project is exempt. And there are specific exemptions that are available to particular projects. The first type of exemption is called a statutory exemption, and that's Article 18 of the statute. And there's a long list of items that are statutorily exempt from CEQA analysis. When they're exempt, we prepare a notice of exemption, and that process stops. Now notice things like ministerial permits are statutorily exempt. So even though a city is issuing a permit, like a building permit or an encroachment permit, or any one of a number of other permits, if they are ministerial in nature, if they are over-the-counter in nature, there's no requirement for CEQA analysis because they're statutorily exempt. Other examples, maybe a little bit bigger than a ministerial permit, Olympic Games are exempt in the state of California from CEQA analysis, which is interesting enough. Emergency projects is another situation. The second type would be categorical exemptions, which start in statute section 15300. And some examples of those are minor alterations to land. That could be a grading permit. That could be a lot line adjustment, a parcel map. Information collection is exempt. Accessory structures are exempt. Infill projects that meet specific parameters in terms of their size and the like. Whether infrastructure is available to serve it, they're also qualify for an exemption. And if that project is determined to be categorically exempt, a notice exemption is prepared and CEQA has been satisfied. There's also something called, it once was called the general rule, now it's called the common sense rule with a recent amendment to CEQA that says that CEQA applies only to projects which have the potential for causing a significant effect on the environment, and where it can be seen with certainty that there is no possibility that the activity in question may have a significant effect on the environment, that activity is not subject to CEQA. That's a tough one to call, and it brings in challenges from time to time because it's subjective, where I can see with certainty that there is no possibility of impact. Someone else may perceive that to be not the case. And it's an exemption that isn't used very often because of that particular case. We'll first look for other statutory or categorical exemptions to satisfy the requirements of CEQA before we would consider the common sense exemption in CEQA. There's a couple other pathways to exemption, but those are the big three. So following our chart, if we don't have an exemption available to us now, then the next step in that process would be that we prepare an initial study. And your handouts include an initial study. The boilerplate to initial studies is attached to your handouts tonight. That's the second component of what I provided to you. So if I don't have an exemption, then in order to determine where I go next, I prepare an initial study. An initial study is a preliminary review that the lead agency conducts, and it determines if a project may have a significant effect on the environment. If the lead agency can determine that an EIR will clearly be required for the project, an initial study isn't necessarily required, but it's still a desirable component of the environmental record. So all phases of the project planning and implementation and operation must be considered within that initial study for that project. And that's supported by CEQA Policy 15003, which further asserts that the lead agency must consider the whole of an action, not its constituent parts, when determining whether it will have a significant effect on the environment. If the project does have a significant effect on the environment, if the findings of the initial study are that there is some significant effect that can't be mitigated to a less than significant level, then the project must complete the EIR process and a draft EIR must be prepared. If the initial study finds that there is either no significant upon the environment or that an impact can be reduced to less than significant levels with mitigation, then either a negative declaration or a mitigated negative declaration is the appropriate document for the city to prepare. So that can be prepared by the city specifically. It can be prepared by, sometimes it could be prepared by the applicant or by an outside consulting firm, but it must be prepared, and it ultimately must be approved by you. You must certify that document as part of the project itself. Actually, the CEQA, if we're looking for sequential, if we took our actions individually, the first action would be to approve the CEQA document, followed by taking action on any of the associated project entitlement components. Noting that we must look at all of those components when we're doing that environmental analysis. There are 18 components associated with the negative declaration, and they span a broad brush of environmental analysis, whether that's the aesthetics of the project or noise, air quality, mineral resources, cultural resources, transportation and traffic, a long list of sections within your initial study which cumulatively fully address the potential environmental impacts of a given project. So, based on your initial study, your findings would be to either issue a negative declaration, a mitigated negative declaration if, in fact, mitigation measures were required to reduce any impacts to less than significant, or an EIR if, in fact, there were impacts that could not be reduced to less than significant with mitigation measures employed. We'll take care of those those EIRs as part of future topic. So a few quick conclusions or a review of my succinct, if not brief, workshop on a very weighty topic. Number one, CEQA analysis is required for all projects. Exemptions are available in some instances, and notice of exemptions are prepared. If not exempt, an initial study must be prepared. The initial study determines whether a negative declaration or an EIR is the appropriate environmental document, and the required document is dependent upon whether the whole of a project's environmental impact is or can be mitigated to a less than significant level. That completes my presentation. This presentation is prepared for informational workshop only. There's no notice of potential action. It is a receive and file action. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Wasn't that painless?
Thank you very much. That was a very good presentation, and I think it's timely for me anyway. We can always know a little bit more about that process, so we look forward to having you back to discuss EIR at some point in the future. Are there any commissioner questions, comments for Mr. Dole? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Coleman.
Mr. Johnson, I think we're moving on to communications.
I just want to say on behalf of the Planning Division, it's been a pleasure to provide your commission with the range of different projects as Bakersfield grows. Your commission has definitely made some wise decisions. And as we close out this year, I would like to say that personally, this has been the best year as a planning director I could have had. And I look forward to starting off next year on January 7th with more projects for your commission's consideration.
Thank you, and happy holidays to you, your family, and all your staff. Any commissioner comments? Hey, we're adjourned. See you next year.